The Moon is covered in nearly 4 billion years of scars, and Earth, which is the same age and was hit just as hard, has almost none of them. Look up on a clear night, and you can read the Moon's whole violent history right there on its face. Every crater still sitting where it landed since the early solar system was young and crowded. Earth took the same barrage. And yet, when you look at it from space, that record is simply gone. The face is smooth. The scars have been rubbed out. That is the strange thing you are here to think about tonight. Not where the craters landed, but where they went. A planet does not simply forget being struck 10,000 times. Something has to erase the evidence patiently for billions of years, and on Earth something does. Geologists have found only the faint eroded ghosts of a few old craters, where the Moon keeps thousands, because our world is still alive in a way the Moon is not. Follow it down to the sea floor, and the mystery only deepens. You might assume the rock beneath the oceans is the oldest ground of all, hidden and undisturbed. It is almost the youngest. The oldest stretch of ocean floor anywhere on Earth is startlingly young compared to a planet that has been turning for close to 4.5 billion years. Every sea floor older than that is simply missing, not buried, gone. Drawn back down into the planet and melted away, in the slow process geologists call subduction, where old crust is destroyed at almost exactly the rate new is born. This is not damage, and that is the part worth settling into slowly. The smoothness is not a wound. It is the planet recycling itself, quietly, without pause, the way it has since before there was anything alive to notice. Earth is a kind of stone tablet that keeps sanding its own surface smooth and writing a fresh draft over the old one. And every mountain you have ever seen, every coastline you know by heart, is just the current draft. The earlier ones have been erased so thoroughly that we have to hunt for the faint ghosts of them in single grains of sand. So here is where we are going. If Earth has been erasing itself all along, then the future is not a story of what will appear, but of what will be rubbed out next, and what the planet will write in its place. Over the next 100 million years, the oceans you can name will begin to close. Mountains that feel eternal will wear down toward nothing, and the continents will drift back together into a single sprawling land that no human eye will ever see whole. We will follow that erasing all the way to the end, gently, with nowhere to be. So get comfortable. Let your shoulders drop into the mattress. Let the light in the room go soft. And if you would like the next of these slow journeys to find you on its own, you can follow along quietly whenever you feel ready. There is nothing to keep up with here. You can drift off at any point, and the planet will keep turning without you, as it has for 4.5 billion years. Tonight, we're going to explore the planet that keeps forgetting itself, and the slow, patient way it will remake the world beneath your feet over the next 100 million years. There are really only two ways for the planet to lose a memory, and it uses both at once. The first works from above, and you have watched it happen your whole life without ever calling it what it is. Rain falls on high ground, gathers into a thread of water, and carries a little of that ground away with it. A single afternoon of this does nothing you would notice. But give it millions of years of afternoons stacked end to end, and that same soft process takes the tallest mountain on a continent and lays it down flat. You can hold the smaller version of it in your hand. Pick up a pebble from a riverbed and feel how smooth it is, how all the edges are gone. That stone was once a sharp broken corner of something larger, and the water rounded it the way water rounds everything it is patient with. Now imagine the same rounding happening to a whole ridgeline, grain by grain, the high places surrendering their material to the low, the sharp young world slowly becoming the soft old one. That is erosion, and it never stops. Not for a single night. Not anywhere water still moves downhill. But erosion alone would only rearrange the surface. It would carry the mountains into the sea and pile them up as sediment, and Earth would simply grow a thicker blanket of its own crushed remains. The oldest layers still waiting underneath to be read. They are not waiting down there. Something takes them away entirely, and that is the second eraser. The outer shell of the planet is not a single unbroken skin. It is broken into enormous slabs, slowly moving, carried on the hot, slow-flowing rock beneath them, driven by the heat rising from deep inside the Earth. Where two slabs meet, sometimes one bends downward and slides beneath the other, descending into the interior, where the heat and pressure eventually melt it down completely, several hundred kilometers below the surface. A piece of the world that took hundreds of millions of years to form can be drawn down and unmade, returned to the same molten source it came from. This is why the sea floor is so young. It is not that the ocean is new. It is that the ocean floor rides a slow conveyor belt, born along one edge and destroyed along another. The amount destroyed almost exactly the amount created, so nothing riding it ever grows old. So set the two erasers side by side, and you can see the whole machine. From above, water takes the high ground apart and hands it to the sea. From below, the seafloor carries the evidence down into the planet and melts it. Between them, there is no safe place for the past to sit, and given enough time, which the planet has in almost unlimited supply, there always is enough. Notice how gentle each step is. No single raindrop moves a mountain. No single year of drift closes an ocean. The erasing is the most patient thing in the world, a pressure so soft you cannot feel it and so relentless that nothing survives it unchanged. The same softness that rounds the pebble in your palm is, at a scale too large for a single life to hold, quietly taking the continents apart. And there is something almost kind in that. We tend to think of loss as damage, a thing gone wrong. But the planet is not being damaged when it erases itself. It is doing the one thing that has kept it changing and alive for 4.5 billion years, while its cratered neighbors sit frozen with their old wounds on display, unable to heal. The moon remembers everything and does nothing with the memory. Earth forgets almost everything, and in the forgetting, it keeps making the world new. So the missing craters are not really missing. They were taken apart from the top by wind and water, and from below by the slow descent of the crust, and their material is still here, moving through the planet in a form you would never recognize. The stone of a vanished crater rim might be sand on a beach tonight, or a layer pressed deep beneath the sea, or molten rock waiting far below to rise again. Nothing was destroyed in the way we usually mean the word. It was only moved and changed and set back into the slow circle it never left, which raises the quiet question we will follow next. If the seafloor rides a conveyor belt, born along one edge and destroyed along the other, then where exactly is it being born, and how do we know how young it truly is? The answer turns out to be written into the rock itself, in a pattern so faint and so orderly that when scientists first learned to read it, it settled one of the longest arguments in the history of the earth sciences. The argument that pattern settled was one of the oldest in all of geology, the question of whether the continents move at all, and it was settled far below the waves, down the middle of the Atlantic. Run a line through the center of that ocean, and you would find a mountain range almost no one ever pictures, a seam running the length of the basin, like a scar that never quite closed. Geologists call it the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and it is where new ocean floor is made. Molten rock rises into the gap between two plates, slowly pulling apart, driven by the upwelling of heat in the mantle below, and cools into fresh, dark basalt, the rock that makes up most of the ocean basins. Then the next pulse rises behind it and pushes that new crust aside. The floor of the ocean is being manufactured continuously, along a line that runs for tens of thousands of kilometers. Here is the part that turns the whole ocean into something you can read. Because the floor is made at the ridge and carried outward in both directions, the youngest rock is always at the seam, and the rock grows steadily older the farther you travel from it, laid out like the pages of a book that opens from the middle, newest in the center, oldest at the far edges near the continents. And when scientists measured how fast this happens, the numbers were startling. The plates separate at an average of about 5 centimeters a year, roughly the pace your fingernails grow, and along the 60,000 kilometers of active rifts on Earth, that adds up to enough new crust to renew the entire floor of every ocean in a little more than 100 million years. That is less than 3% of the age of the planet. The ocean basins, which feel so ancient, turn out to be among the very youngest features on Earth. The way we learn to read those pages is one of the quiet, beautiful stories in science. As the molten rock cools at the ridge, it locks in a faint record of the direction of Earth's magnetic field at that moment, like a compass needle frozen into the stone. And Earth's magnetic field does not hold still. Every so often, over long stretches of time, it flips its direction entirely, north becoming south and slowly back again, and each reversal is preserved in the rock that happened to be cooling when it occurred. So as new floor spreads outward from the ridge, it carries a striped pattern, band after band frozen pointing one way, then the other, laid down evenly on both sides of the seam. In 1963, 2 geologists at Cambridge, Fred Vine and Drummond Matthews, realized these matching stripes, mirrored across the ridge like a reflection, were proof that the seafloor was spreading, a barcode of the planet's own changing magnetism printed into stone. It was one of the pieces of evidence that finally convinced the world the continents really do move. You already trust this kind of reading. When you look at the rings inside a cut tree, you know the story is there to be read. A wide ring for a good year, a thin one for a drought, the whole life of the tree written in circles from the center out. The seafloor is the same idea at the scale of an ocean. The stripes are its rings, the ridge is its newest year, and just as a tree cannot show you the rings of one that fell and rotted long ago, the ocean cannot show you the floor that has already sunk back into the planet. What you can read is only the part that still exists, and that part is young. Now hold a place you know against that map. The coastline you have stood on sits near the old outer edge of the ocean floor, where the reading runs out and the crust grows old enough to begin sinking. The water offshore of almost any coast you can name rests on some of the oldest seafloor there is, which is to say, still far younger than the continent behind you. The land remembers. The seafloor barely does. Stand on the shore and you are standing almost exactly on the boundary between the planet's long memory and its short one, between the draft it keeps and the draft it is constantly throwing away. And this begins to answer the question the opening left open. The craters are missing because the surface they were carved into has largely been unmade, worn off the continents by the rain or carried out to sea and drawn back down at the ocean's far edges. The planet is not hiding its past somewhere clever. It is genuinely deleting it with an elegant machine that runs on nothing but the heat still rising from a slowly cooling world. So the ocean floor is young because it is always being replaced, and the continents are old because they mostly float and refuse to sink. But that opens the next soft question. If the mountains are carried into the sea, and the sea floor carried down into the planet, then where does all of it go once it is swallowed? To follow that, we have to look at the great slow wheel that connects every kind of rock to every other. The cycle that turns a mountain into a beach and a beach, in time, back into a mountain. When you were young, someone probably taught you the water cycle, one of the few pieces of science almost everyone keeps for life. Water evaporates from the ocean, rises into clouds, falls as rain, runs down the rivers, and returns to the sea to begin again. The same water traveling the same circle for as long as there has been water. What almost no one is taught is that the rock does the very same thing, only so slowly that a lifetime is far too short to witness a single turn of the wheel. Here is the loop in the words the geologists use. Deep inside the planet there is molten rock, and where it rises and cools, it hardens into solid stone. This is igneous rock, frozen from a melt, and it makes up most of the ground beneath you, the dark basalt of the ocean floors and the pale granite of the continents. The two erasers grind it down into loose grains of sand and silt and clay, which wash into the low places and the sea and settle, layer upon patient layer, until the weight of everything above presses them together into sedimentary rock, a new stone made entirely of the crushed remains of the old. Bury that rock deeper, push it down where the planet is hot, and it changes again, its crystals reforming under heat and pressure into metamorphic rock, the word itself meaning changed in form. Carry it deeper still, and it melts completely, becoming molten rock once more, ready to rise and cool and begin the circle again. So the mountain you are picturing does not simply vanish when it erodes. It is not destroyed, it is reused. That is the one place in all of this where the distinction matters enough to say plainly, and I will only say it once. The material of an old mountain becomes the sand of a beach, and the sand becomes the stone of a sea floor, and that stone is carried down and reheated, and one day rises again as the root of some mountain no living thing has yet seen. Every grain has been many things. In the language of one geology text, a single piece of stone can begin as primitive material older than the earth itself, be heated into igneous rock, be redeposited as sedimentary rock many times over, and finally be changed deep underground into hard, bright metamorphic stone. The atoms in the rock beneath your house have almost certainly been part of older worlds, older coastlines, older ranges whose names are gone past recovery. You are living on the current draft of a page written and erased more times than anyone could count. This is why the palimpsest is the truest picture of the planet. A palimpsest is an old manuscript scraped clean so the surface could be used again, then written over with something new, and only later did anyone realize that beneath the new writing, faint and broken, the ghost of the older text was often still there, never quite removed. Earth is exactly this. Every continent is a fresh text written over a scraped surface, and here and there, if you know how to look, the ghost of an earlier draft shows through, a band of ancient rock that escaped the scraping, a mineral grain older than the stone around it, a pattern that only makes sense if something was written here before and rubbed away. Think of it as a library that stays alive by quietly destroying its own oldest books, pulping its most fragile volumes back to blank paper and printing new ones on the recovered stock. Nothing is thrown out. Everything is used again, but the exact words on the exact pages are gone, folded back into raw material and reissued as something else. A visitor would be horrified at how little of the original survives, and yet the library is not dying. It is the most alive library there could be, always full, always renewing, never a museum. The planet runs its collection the same way, and that is why its shelves are so young, even though the building is impossibly old. There is a question hiding in this that has no comfortable answer, and I will leave it open the way the planet leaves it open for us. If almost every rock has been recycled, then how much of Earth's own history has been erased past recovery? Whole chapters, whole hundreds of millions of years, may have left almost no readable trace, worn off and melted down before anyone could ever have read them. We study the planet's deep past through the few pages that happen to survive, with no way of knowing how many there once were. It is a strange thing to hold as you fall asleep, that the story of the ground beneath you is mostly already forgotten, not by us, but by the ground itself. And still, the wheel keeps turning, gently, indifferent to whether anyone is reading. The molten rock rises and cools tonight somewhere under the sea. The rain falls tonight on some high place and carries a little of it away. The grains settle tonight on some quiet dark sea floor and begin the slow press into stone. None of it hurries. None of it needs you awake. The loop that has run for 4.5 billion years does not pause for a single sleeping listener, and there is a deep comfort in belonging to a process so vast and so calm that your only part in it tonight is to rest. So the planet reuses everything and keeps almost nothing, and that is how it stays young. But if the rock is always cycling, then the mountains that feel like the very definition of permanence must be caught in the loop as well. Let us go and stand at the foot of a mountain range then, and ask how something so vast could ever, in the end, be temporary. There is nothing that feels more permanent than a mountain. We use them as the very measure of things that do not change, and say something is as old as the hills and mean it will always be there. And yet a mountain range is one of the most temporary features the planet makes. A passing swell in the crust that rises, stands for a while, and is worn back down to almost nothing, all within the ordinary rhythm of geologic time. Picture two ranges side by side. The first is young, all jagged peaks and knife-edged ridges and sharp summits that hold the snow, the kind of skyline that looks as if it were only just built, because in geological terms it was. The Alps are like this, a young range still being raised as the African plate pushes slowly into Eurasia, their peaks sculpted sharp by ice and water. The second is old, its summits rounded and soft, its slopes gentle enough to walk, more like a series of long, slow waves than a wall of stone. The Appalachians in eastern North America are like this, telling the same story as the Alps, only much further along. Those gentle, worn ridges you could drive through without a second thought were, hundreds of millions of years ago, a soaring range that may well have rivaled the tallest mountains standing anywhere on Earth today. Time did to them what it will one day do to every sharp young peak, now catching the last of the evening light. And here is the part that makes mountains stranger and more wonderful than they first appear. A mountain is not only the part you can see. When a range is built, the crust thickens downward too, reaching deep into the planet in a hidden route, because the light rock of the continents floats on the denser, slow-flowing rock of the mantle beneath it, the way an iceberg floats on the sea. This is the principle geologists call isostasy, and it is one of the quietest and most beautiful ideas in all of Earth science. The mountain you see is the small part above the waterline. Most of its mass hangs down below, unseen, holding the whole thing up. And you know how an iceberg behaves. If you were to shave off the exposed ice, the whole berg would slowly rise, lifting new ice out of the water to replace what you took, until it settled once more into balance. Mountains do exactly this. As the two erasers grind the summits away and carry the material off to the sea, the lightened root beneath slowly rises in answer, pushing fresh rock up from deep below. So a range wears down far more slowly than you would expect, because it keeps refilling itself from underneath, like a loaf of bread that goes on rising even as you slice from the top. This is the only reason the deepest rocks ever reach the surface. The rock that once formed miles down inside a mountain's root eventually comes up into the daylight, because the mountain above it was shaved away over hundreds of millions of years, while the root rose steadily to meet the sky. When you stand on certain old worn hills, you are standing on stone that once sat deep in the buried heart of a range that no longer exists anywhere on Earth. Sit with the time scale of that, because it is one of the gentlest things there is. A mountain does not fall. It is not knocked down in some sudden event. It subsides, over a span so long that 100 lifetimes laid end to end would not be enough to watch a single tall peak become a single soft hill. Every year the high places give up a little to the low, and the root rises a little to compensate by an amount far too small to measure against a single life. You could climb a summit tonight and return to it every evening for the rest of your years, and it would look exactly the same to you every time, and it would be wrong. It would be very slightly shorter when you finished than when you began, and neither you nor anyone alive could ever feel the difference. And this is what the next 100 million years holds for every range you can name. The sharp young mountains of today will soften, their snows retreating as their summits lower, their valleys filling with the sediment of their own peaks, their material traveling to the sea to become the floor of some future ocean, or the plain of some future continent, exactly as the old worn ranges around you now were once somebody's soaring skyline. There is no such thing as a permanent mountain. There is only a mountain you have not yet watched for long enough. None of this is loss in the way we usually mean the word. The mountain is not being taken from anyone. It is simply doing the slow work of returning to the cycle, handing its height back to the planet to use again. The range that shelters some valley you love will one day be a gentle rise, then a plain, then perhaps the bed of a shallow sea, and then, if the wheel turns far enough, the root of a new range somewhere else entirely, catching the light of an evening no living eye will ever see. So the mountains are temporary, worn away from above and lifted from below, forever trading height for time. And the material they surrender does not simply pile up at their feet. It is carried away, grain by grain, by the most patient movers on the whole planet, so quietly that you would never suspect them of moving anything at all. Let us follow the water now then, and see how a thing as soft as a river takes a continent apart. Follow one single grain of sand. It begins high up, broken loose from some rock on a slope by a night of frost, or a morning of rain, and it starts downhill a little at a time. Whenever there is water to carry it, it tumbles into a trickle. The trickle joins a stream, the stream joins a river, and now the grain is one of countless others carried along in the moving water. It is in no hurry. It might rest for a century in a still bend of the river, half buried in the mud. Then a single flood lifts it and carries it a mile downstream in an afternoon, and it rests again for another 100 years. Its whole journey is made of long stillnesses and brief sudden movements, and yet the direction never changes. It is going to the sea, because everything the rivers carry is going to the sea, and it has been going there since the first rain fell on the first high ground. A river does not look like a machine for taking a continent apart, but that is exactly what it is. All the water that falls on the land and does not evaporate has to find its way back to the ocean, and as it goes, it carries the land with it, dissolved in the water, suspended as a fine haze of particles, and rolled along the bottom as sand and gravel. The great rivers move an amount of sediment every year that is genuinely difficult to picture. Whole mountains' worth of ground-up material delivered to the sea year after year, without anyone on the bank ever noticing that the continent behind them is very slowly getting lower. You have seen the two ends of this journey without ever connecting them. At one end, a river cutting down through solid rock, carving a valley or a deep canyon, exposing bands of stone that record ages of the planet stacked one upon another. Stand at the rim of a great canyon, and every layer in its walls is a page the river cut down through, older toward the bottom, opened like a book by a thread of moving water given enough time. The river did not blast that canyon open. It kept flowing in the same place, wearing the rock down by the thickness of a hair each year, and the depth you are looking at is that hair multiplied by an almost unimaginable number of quiet years. At the other end, where the river reaches the sea and slows and drops everything it carries, the land grows outward into the water. From the windows of the International Space Station, astronauts have photographed the Betsiboka River in Madagascar, carrying its load of red sediment down from the mountains through a maze of interwoven channels, building heavy new islands of deposited earth out into the bay. That is a delta, new ground made entirely of old ground that traveled downriver to reach it. The canyon and the delta are the same story told at its beginning and its end. Every canyon is a mountain on its way to becoming a delta, and every delta is a mountain that has already arrived. Give this the time it actually takes, and you arrive at something remarkable. A continent left entirely alone, its mountains eroding and its rivers carrying the pieces away, and nothing lifting the land back up, would eventually be worn down close to a low, flat plain near the level of the sea. The only reason the continents are not already flat is that the planet keeps building new high ground about as fast as the rivers tear the old down, raising fresh mountains where the plates collide even as the rivers level the ranges that rose before them. It is a contest with no end, the building and the leveling running side by side for billions of years, and the landscape you know is simply the score at this one moment in an impossibly long game. And the softness of it is the wonder of it. There is no drama in a river on an ordinary day. It just moves, the way it moved yesterday and will tomorrow, carrying its invisible cargo of ground-up mountains toward a sea that will bury it and press it slowly into stone. You could sit on the bank of a great river tonight, and the water would look like nothing but water, and it would be carrying a continent past you the whole time, one grain at a time, so gently that the only way to see it is to stand far back in time and watch the whole land quietly lower. If you find that it steadies you to drift off inside stories like this one, the slow true ones with nowhere to be, you are always welcome to follow along quietly so the next of these journeys can find its own way to you on some other night when you need somewhere gentle to rest your mind. That is all. No hurry. Let the river keep moving, because the rivers are only one of the hands that take the mountains apart. Water does its slow work wherever it can flow, but in the cold, high places, there is another eraser at work, heavier and stronger than any river, moving so slowly that you would never believe it was moving at all, carving the land on a scale even the great rivers cannot match. So let us go up now into the cold and watch what happens to the mountains where the water turns to ice. Water does its erasing gently, one grain at a time, but water has a heavier, slower, stronger cousin, and it carves the land with a force nothing else on the surface can match. When enough snow falls in a cold place and does not melt away in summer, it builds up year after year, and its own weight packs the lower layers down until the loose snow becomes solid ice. And when that ice grows thick enough, something almost unbelievable happens. It begins to flow, not in any way your eye could catch, but truly, the whole vast mass creeping downhill under its own weight. A glacier is a river of ice, moving so slowly that you would have to watch it for years to be certain it was moving, grinding along its bed with the crushing weight of a frozen mountain behind it. The astronomers who study our planet from space describe ice as one of the most effective sculptors of rock there is, and the sharp beauty of our youngest mountains is owed almost entirely to the patient work of ice and running water. And as it flows, the glacier carries stone. It reaches down into the ground beneath it, freezes broken rock into its underside, then drags those embedded stones across the bedrock like a sheet of the coarsest sandpaper imaginable, gouging and polishing the land as it passes. Geologists have names for the two halves of this work. There is plucking, where the ice freezes onto the rock and tears loose whole pieces as it moves, and abrasion, where the stones already caught in the ice grind the surface smooth beneath them. Between the two, a glacier does not just scratch the land, it reshapes it entirely. Where a river carves a narrow V along a single thread of water, a glacier carves a broad, deep U, scooping out a whole valley with steep walls and a wide, flat floor, taking away not a channel, but an entire landscape at once. The most beautiful valleys in many ranges, the wide ones with sheer sides and long green floors, are the fingerprints of ice that melted away long ago. You have almost certainly seen the work of ice without knowing whose work it was. Those deep-sea inlets that reach far inland between towering cliffs, the ones that look as though someone took an enormous blade and cut a slot into the coast, are glacial valleys. The ice carved them below the level of the sea, and when it melted, the ocean flowed quietly in to fill them. We call them fjords, and their impossible depth and sheer walls are nothing but the mold left by a vanished tongue of ice. The great flat regions dotted with countless lakes, strewn with boulders that plainly do not match the bedrock beneath them, are places where sheets of ice once lay miles thick and dragged the whole surface smooth, then left their carried stones behind like a tide leaving shells. Those out-of-place boulders even have a name, erratics, stones set down in a landscape they were never born in. Some are the size of a house, resting alone in a field, and for a long time no one could explain how they got there, until we understood that a river of ice had carried them like pebbles. And ice, like everything else tonight, comes and goes on a rhythm of its own. The planet has passed through many long cold stretches and many warm ones, the ice advancing across the continents and then retreating, again and again, each advance rewriting the land it covered, and each retreat handing the work back to the rivers and the rain. Over the next 100 million years, ice will almost certainly come again, and it will carve whatever mountains the plates have raised by then into valleys, and whatever coastlines the oceans have made into fjords, sculpting the future world as it sculpted this one. Here is the gentler way to hold all of this. A sculptor working in stone does not add anything to the block. They only ever remove, chipping and grinding away everything that is not the statue. And the figure emerges precisely because so much has been taken from around it. Erosion is the planet working in exactly that way, removing rather than adding. And the landscapes you love are not so much what the erasing happened to spare as what the erasing actually made. The valley is not the wreckage left after some destruction. The valley is the shape the ice was carving all along. The fjord, the polished dome of granite, the long, smooth ridge, every one of them is a statue. And the eraser was the sculptor. And the missing stone is not a wound, but the empty space that lets the shape exist. So when you look at a landscape carved by ice, you are not looking at a place that was damaged and worn down. You are looking at a place that was made slowly by patient removal. There is a real stillness in that thought worth carrying towards sleep, because it means the erasing planet is not only unmaking, it is shaping everywhere, all the time. Every valley you have ever stood in was carved for you by something enormously patient that finished its work and slipped away thousands of years before you were born. The ice grinds the mountains into valleys, and the valleys fill with rivers, and the rivers carry the pieces to the sea, and the sea floor carries them down into the planet. But there is still one more eraser at work on the surface, the driest and most invisible of them all, and it does its carving in exactly the places where neither the rivers nor the ice can ever reach. So let us leave the cold behind now and go somewhere warm and dry and utterly silent, and watch the wind do its patient work on the stone. In the places too dry for rivers and too warm for ice, the erasing does not stop. It only changes its tool. Here the wind takes over, and though it seems far too soft a thing to shape solid stone, given enough time it carves the desert as surely as water carves the valley. The wind lifts the loose grains of sand and gathers them into dunes, whole seas of them, long ridges that march slowly across the land. Astronauts looking down from the International Space Station have photographed vast dune fields along the edge of the Sahara, on the border between Algeria and Libya, some of the driest ground on Earth, and from that height you can see the sand organized into wave after wave, a whole landscape made of nothing but wind-blown grains. The way a dune moves is one of the quiet wonders of a desert. The wind pushes the grains up the gentle windward slope, one small bounce at a time, and when each grain reaches the crest, it tumbles down the steep far side and comes to rest. Geologists call that bouncing motion saltation, and the sum of all those tiny leaps is a dune that creeps steadily forward, even though no single grain ever travels very far. The whole ridge migrates downwind, a mountain of sand walking so slowly that you would have to leave and come back a lifetime later to see that it had moved at all, and the sand the wind carries becomes a tool for cutting. Close to the ground, where the moving air holds the most grains, the wind sandblasts whatever stands in its path, hollowing and shaping the rocks over centuries, until the desert fills with stone carved into forms that look almost deliberate, pillars and arches and sculpted ridges shaped by nothing but moving air and the grit it carries. There is no water here and no ice, and still the land is being taken apart, grain by grain, by a force you cannot see and can only feel against your face. The desert looks like the most changeless place on earth, and it is being reworked constantly, only on a clock so slow that the stillness is an illusion. The finest material the wind lifts does not stay in the desert at all. The smallest particles, the dust, can be carried high into the air and travel enormous distances, riding the great currents of the atmosphere from one continent to another before settling far from where they began. From the space station, instruments have tracked these veils of desert dust as they move through the sky. Tiny aerosol particles lifted from the world's deserts and spread across whole oceans. Dust raised from the Sahara can fall, days later, on a rainforest on the far side of the Atlantic, carrying minerals that feed the soil there, so that in a real and measurable way, one continent is quietly fertilized by the slow disassembly of another. The wind is a mover of continents in its own patient fashion, taking the ground apart in one place and sprinkling it down in another, stitching the far corners of the planet together with a thin thread of drifting dust. Sit for a moment with how intimate this makes the erasing. You have felt it yourself, on any windy day, the faint sting of grit against your skin, the fine film of dust that settles on every surface, no matter how often you wipe it clean. That is the same force, at the same work, that carves the desert and lifts the dust across the sea. It is not distant or abstract. It is the wind you have felt on your face your entire life, and it has been carving the world the whole time, so gently that you took it for nothing more than weather. So follow a single grain once more, the way we followed the grain down the river. It begins as a fleck broken loose from some larger stone in the dry heat, and the wind picks it up and sets it down and picks it up again, nudging it across the desert over years. It might join a dune and travel inside it for a century. It might one day be caught high in a rising current, carried across an ocean, and dropped on a distant shore, where the rain finally washes it into a river. And then it is the river's grain, traveling to the sea, to settle and press into stone and sink into the planet and rise again, one distant day, as part of some future desert, where some future wind will lift it once more. The grain does not belong to any one of the erasers. It is passed from hand to hand, wind to water, to ice to stone, and back again. And there is a strange comfort in that, in a small thing that is never destroyed and never truly still, only carried, patiently, from one shape of the world into the next. So now the picture is nearly complete. Water wears the land down from above and carries it to the sea. Ice grinds the high places into valleys. The wind carves the dry places and lifts their finest dust clear across the world. There is no corner of the surface the erasing cannot reach, and there is a quiet peace in that completeness, in knowing the same gentle force is at work everywhere, taking the world softly to pieces so slowly that it looks as though nothing is happening at all. But all of it, the rivers and the ice and the wind, is only carrying the land toward the sea, and the sea floor is carrying it somewhere in turn. So let us follow it all the way down now, to the deepest part of the whole machine, the long, dark trenches where the surface of the world goes to disappear. There are places in the ocean so deep that if you could lower the tallest mountain on earth into one of them, the summit would vanish beneath the waves, with kilometers of dark water still to spare above it. These are the trenches, long narrow gashes in the sea floor, and they are among the quietest, most consequential places on the planet, because they are where the surface of the world goes to be unmade. Everything we have followed tonight, the eroded mountains, the sediment carried down every river, the striped floor spreading from the ridges, all of it is heading, in the end, toward a place like this. The deepest of them, the Mariana Trench in the Western Pacific, reaches down nearly 11 kilometers, far deeper than the highest peak stands tall, and yet from the surface there is nothing to see but ordinary open water. Here is what happens at a trench. Two of the great plates are moving toward each other, and where they meet, the heavier one, almost always the dense floor of an ocean, bends downward and slides beneath the other, descending at a shallow angle into the hot interior of the planet. Geologists call this a subduction zone, and it is often marked at the surface by one of these deep trenches, like the long trench that runs down the coast of Asia off Japan. The plate goes down slowly, at about the pace your fingernails grow, but it never stops, and over millions of years, an entire ocean's worth of floor can be drawn down and consumed. The rock does not survive the descent. As it sinks, the rising heat and crushing pressure cook it and wring the water out of it, and eventually, several hundred kilometers down, it melts completely, mixing back into the slow-churning interior, where in time it may rise again somewhere else as fresh molten stone. The trench is not a grave. It is a mouth, feeding the surface back into the planet that made it. And the same slow descent that destroys the crust also builds some of the grandest things on the surface. As the sinking slab is heated, it releases the water locked inside it up into the rock above, and that water lowers the melting point of the rock, so it melts more easily and rises to feed long chains of volcanoes, standing in graceful arcs above the trenches. Some of the most dramatic mountains and islands on the planet were raised directly by the destruction of the seafloor beneath them, and where two continents ride toward each other on plates whose ocean floor between them has already been consumed, the continents themselves finally meet, and neither will sink, because the thick, light rock of a continent cannot be pushed down into the mantle. So instead they crumple, the crust buckling and folding and driven upward, throwing up the very highest mountains on Earth. The Great Wall of the Himalaya was raised this way and is still rising, as the plate carrying India presses slowly into the mass of Asia. So hold the two extremes of the planet's surface together, the deepest trench and the highest peak, and see that they are not opposites at all. They are made by the same motion. The trench is where the floor goes down. The peak is where the collision that follows drives the land up. Both are the signature of plates in slow, relentless contact, and neither would exist without the other. Zoom out far enough and the whole thing looks less like violence and more like a slow, indrawn breath, the crust folding down in one place and rising in another. There is a question here worth leaving open, because it points toward where the rest of the night is going. If an ocean can be entirely consumed at a trench, floor and all, then an ocean is not a permanent feature of the world either. It is a temporary thing, a body of water sitting over a sea floor manufactured along one edge and destroyed along another, and if the destruction ever outpaces the creation, the ocean will slowly close, its two far coastlines drawing together across millions of years until the water is gone, and the lands on either side finally meet. Somewhere on Earth right now, an ocean is being born and just beginning to widen. Somewhere else, an ocean is quietly dying, its floor descending into a trench faster than new floor can form. You cannot feel any of it. But the map of the world is not a fixed thing you were handed at birth. It is a single frozen frame from a film that has been running for billions of years and will run for billions more. Let that settle, because it changes the way you see everything we have talked about. The mountains are temporary, the sea floor is temporary, and now the oceans themselves turn out to be temporary, and the continents are only drifting passengers. Nothing on the surface is truly fixed. The one permanent thing is the motion itself, the slow, steady overturning of a still, warm planet, endlessly making and unmaking the whole face of the world without ever pausing to rest, which means the shape of the world has a history and a future, both stranger and grander than the single snapshot we happen to live inside. Because if oceans open and close, and continents drift together and apart, then this has all happened before, many times over. The continents gathering into single vast supercontinents and breaking apart again in a slow, steady beat that has kept time through most of the life of the planet. But before we listen to that great beat, there is one more thing the erasing quietly does that almost no one would think of as erasing at all. And it is the quiet reason the planet has stayed gentle enough for long enough to be lived on. So let us stay with the wearing down of the rock a little longer and see how it has been keeping the whole world breathing. Here is a strange and quiet thing about the erasing. Every time rain falls on rock and slowly breaks it down, a little of the air disappears into the process. The rain carries a faint trace of carbon dioxide gathered from the atmosphere, and as it weathers the rock, that carbon is captured, bound into new minerals, washed to the sea, and eventually locked away in the pale carbonate rock that holds an enormous store of the planet's carbon. So the very same wearing down that deletes the mountains is also, without anyone noticing, quietly pulling one of the warming gases out of the sky and burying it. Erosion is not only an eraser of landscapes, it is a slow and patient scrubber of the air, and the planet has a way of putting that carbon back, so the sky is never simply emptied. Volcanoes, over the long run, release carbon dioxide from deep inside the earth, returning much of the gas the weathering takes away, much of it old carbon recycled up from crust that was subducted and melted long ago. Between the slow burying by weathering and the slow releasing by volcanoes, there is a balance, and the beautiful part is that it corrects itself. When the planet grows warmer, the rains grow heavier, and the weathering speeds up, pulling more carbon out of the air and slowly cooling the planet back down. When the planet grows cooler, the weathering slows, the carbon builds back up from the volcanoes, and the world gently warms once more. It is a thermostat made of nothing but rock and rain and fire, acting across hundreds of thousands and millions of years, holding the climate of the whole planet within a range where the oceans can stay liquid and life can hold on. We know this thermostat has been running almost the entire history of the Earth because of a puzzle in the young sun. When the sun first settled into its steady life, about 4.5 billion years ago, it gave off only around 70% of the energy it radiates today. By every simple expectation, an Earth under such a dim sun should have frozen solid, and yet simple life was already thriving when the planet was young, which means it was not frozen, but comfortably warm. The answer scientists have settled on is that the early air held far more carbon dioxide, a thicker greenhouse blanket that trapped the weak young sunlight. And as the sun slowly brightened over billions of years, the warming sped up the weathering of the rocks, which drew that carbon dioxide steadily back out of the air, thinning the blanket at almost exactly the rate the sun was strengthening. The two changes very nearly cancelled, and Earth was held at a nearly constant temperature for most of its long life. That quiet balancing act, more than almost anything else, is why there was time enough and calm enough for complex living things to appear at all. None of this happens at a speed anyone could feel, and that is precisely why it works. A thermostat that jumped in response to every passing cloud would be useless for keeping a whole planet livable across billions of years. This one answers across geological time, so slowly that from inside a human life it appears to do nothing, and yet over the deep past it has patiently steered the planet away from freezing solid and away from cooking dry again and again, with the unhurried authority of something with all the time in the world. Think of the heating in an old stone house, with heavy iron radiators that take an age to warm and an age to cool. You open a door, the cold air spills in around your ankles, and nothing seems to happen. And yet, over the next slow hour, the system quietly answers, the room settling back to its steady temperature. The planet's carbon thermostat is that same patient system, built at the scale of a world and running at the pace of an age, and the slow wearing down of the mountains is one of the levers it quietly pulls to keep it running. There is an open question folded into this worth carrying gently. If the erasing of the rock is part of what keeps the planet livable, then erosion is not the enemy of a stable world at all. It is one of the quiet conditions of one. A planet that could not wear its rocks down would have no way to pull the carbon back out of its sky, no thermostat, no self-correction, and it might long ago have tipped into a frozen or a scorching state from which nothing could return. The grinding down that deletes the past may be part of the very reason the planet has stayed calm enough, for long enough, for anything to be here to notice it. The erasing is not only how the world forgets, it is also a large part of how the world endures. So the next time you picture a mountain wearing away, you might let the picture carry a little more warmth than loss. That wearing away is breathing. It is the planet drawing a slow breath of carbon down out of the sky and holding it in the stone, and somewhere far off a volcano letting a slow breath back out, and between the two the climate holds steady across the ages, a great calm respiration of rock that has kept the world livable since long before there were any lungs to lend it the word. The planet has been breathing this way the entire time, so slowly you could never hear it, and it is breathing this way tonight, holding the whole world gentle around you while you sleep. And that gentle, self-correcting, long-breathing planet keeps its very largest rhythm of all in the slow gathering and scattering of the continents, the great beat we have been circling toward all evening. So let us finally go and listen to that metronome. Every so often, across the long life of the planet, all the drifting continents have found their way to the same part of the globe and merged into one enormous landmass, a single continent surrounded by a single world-spanning ocean. And then, after tens of millions of years, that great land has split, and its pieces have wandered off across the face of the planet again, only to gather somewhere else much later and do the whole thing over. This has happened not once but several times, a slow gathering and scattering that has kept time through most of Earth's history, and geologists call it the supercontinent cycle. The most recent of these gatherings is the one whose name has slipped from the textbooks into ordinary speech. Its name is Pangaea, and we owe both the name and the first serious case for it to a German scientist named Alfred Wegener. Early in the 20th century, Wegener was studying a map of the world when he was struck by how neatly the coast of South America seemed to fit against the coast of Africa, as if the two had once been pressed together and torn apart. He noticed, too, that fossils of the very same creatures turned up on both sides of the Atlantic, on continents now separated by a whole ocean, in ways that made little sense unless the lands had once been joined. And so he proposed that all the continents had once been fused into a single supercontinent, which he named Pangaea, from the Greek for all the land. On that vanished world, You could, in principle, have walked from one end of the dry land to the other without ever crossing a sea. For decades, most scientists would not accept it, because Wegener could not explain how something as vast and solid as a continent could possibly move. That missing piece was plate tectonics, and it would take another half-century of work in geology and oceanography and the reading of the sea floor to supply it. When the answer finally came, Wegener turned out to have been right all along. The continents really had been joined, and they do move, carried on the slow conveyor of the plates. But Pangaea, for all its fame, was not the first. Before it, there were earlier gatherings, older supercontinents with far less familiar names, each assembled from the scattered continents of its day, and each torn apart again in its turn. The best known of these older lands is Rodinia, which had already come and gone long before Pangaea ever formed. When Pangaea itself broke apart, its fragments became the continents we know today, and they have been drifting toward their present arrangement ever since, which is not a destination, but simply where they happen to have reached on this one particular morning of a very long journey. Now listen to the tempo, because the tempo is the beautiful part. One full turn of this cycle, from one supercontinent to the next, takes something on the order of a few 100 million years, a span so vast that the entire history of complex life on land fits inside only a couple of its beats. This is the slowest rhythm the planet keeps, and it helps to set it beside rhythms your body already knows. Your resting heartbeat is about 1 beat a second, the quickest of the three. The tides rise and fall roughly twice a day, tied to the turning of the earth beneath the pull of the moon. And the supercontinents gather and scatter on a rhythm of hundreds of millions of years, so slow that the whole of recorded human history would not fill even the smallest sliver of a single beat. And yet, the slowest pulse is regular enough that we can hear roughly where it is going. The continents are still moving, still riding their plates at the pace of a growing fingernail. And if you run that motion forward the way you might run a piece of music forward to hear the next bar, the continents begin to converge again. The oceans dying now will finish closing. The oceans widening now will begin to close in their turn. And the scattered continents of today will, over the next couple of 100 million years, gather once more into a new supercontinent. Geologists have already begun to sketch what it might look like, and have even given it names, though no eye that could recognize a continent will ever be there to see it finished. Think about what that means for the map you carry in your head. The familiar shapes of the continents, the outlines you could draw from memory with your eyes closed, are not the true and settled shape of the world. They are one frame arranged only for this brief geological instant, already dissolving far too slowly to feel into the next. The world map is a photograph of a dance caught at a single step, and the dancers have not stopped moving. They have only moved too slowly for the photograph ever to blur. There is something deeply steadying in belonging to a rhythm that old and that patient. The continents were gathering and scattering long before there was anything alive to witness it, and they will go on long after the last witness is gone. You are here for a fraction of a single one of its pulses, a sliver so thin it does not register on the planet's own slow clock, and that is not a sad thing. It means you are resting inside something enormous and calm and utterly reliable, a rhythm that has never once skipped and never hurried, holding steady beneath your feet while you sleep. The continents gather and scatter on the slowest pulse the planet keeps, and we are living inside one long exhale of it, the fragments of the last great supercontinent still drifting slowly toward the next. To see where they are going, we only have to look at what is happening right now to the two oceans at either edge of that scattered arrangement. The young widening ocean on one side of the world and the old, quietly closing sea on the other. So let us go and watch them move. There is an ocean growing wider every year, and you have almost certainly crossed it, or flown above it, or stood along its edge. The Atlantic is widening. Along that hidden seam down its middle, the mid-Atlantic ridge, new floor is made and pushed slowly outward, and the two sides of the ocean drift apart by roughly the width your fingernails grow in a year. Over a single human lifetime, that is very nearly nothing. The far shores moving apart by only a few feet, less than the length of the bed you are lying in. But stretch that drift across 100 million years, and it adds up to a wholesale rearrangement of the globe. Coastlines carried thousands of miles from where they sit tonight. And while the Atlantic quietly widens, another sea is quietly disappearing. The Mediterranean, that warm, familiar sea ringed by so much of human history, sits on the boundary between two continents, moving toward each other. Africa is drifting slowly northward, pressing toward Europe, and the sea caught between them is being squeezed, its floor consumed, and its opposite shores pushed closer together. This is the same collision, still in progress, that long ago began raising the Alps. The Mediterranean, we know, is only the last narrow remnant of a much larger and older ocean that once lay between the continents, an ancient sea called the Tethys, most of which has already been swallowed as the two great landmasses closed in. What you see today as that whole bright blue sea is only the final sliver of it. So picture the next 100 million years written into these two motions. The Atlantic keeps widening until, models suggest, the far edges of its floor grow old and cold and heavy enough to begin sinking at new trenches of their own, and the long widening slowly reverses into a closing. Meanwhile, Africa completes its unhurried journey into Europe, closing the Mediterranean entirely, and along the seam where the two continents crumple together, a new range of mountains rises, exactly as earlier collisions raised the ranges we climb today. The sea you might once have swum in on some warm evening becomes, in the fullness of that time, the high dry rock of a mountain chain, its old floor lifted slowly into the sky. And this is not a poet's fancy. It is something geologists already find written plainly in the rock. High in ranges built by ancient collisions, far from any shore and thousands of feet above the sea, you can find the fossils of creatures that lived on the floor of a vanished ocean, seashells stranded on the windswept peaks. Those shells were laid down on some old seabed, pressed into stone, and lifted into the sky as the ocean beneath them closed and the land buckled upward. Each one is a small, quiet proof of what is coming for the Mediterranean. A sea becoming a summit, a creature that never once left the sea floor now sitting, still and perfect, higher than the clouds. It helps to feel these motions as comings together rather than collisions, because the word collision carries a speed and a violence that simply is not there. Think instead of two people seated at the opposite ends of a very long table, reaching their hands slowly toward the middle across an unimaginable span of time. There is no crash, no shock. There is only the gradual closing of a distance, so gradual that at any single moment nothing seems to be happening, and yet the hands do meet in the end. The continents close their oceans this way, gently, across spans of time that dwarf everything, two long shores reaching toward each other until the water between them is gone and the two lands are simply one. And here is where the whole night begins to gather into a single picture. The erasing planet is not only taking things away, it is also, in the same motion, delivering the continents toward one another, gathering the scattered fragments of the last supercontinent into the makings of the next. The same slow drift that swallows the sea floor and wears the mountains down is carrying the land masses home. If you could rise high above the planet and speed the film up enough to watch, you would see the familiar map soften and dissolve, and a stranger, older kind of map take its place, a single great land gathering itself out of the pieces you thought you knew by heart. No one will ever stand on a shore and watch this happen, and that is worth saying gently, so it can be held without alarm. The next supercontinent will assemble across a span so far beyond any human life, beyond even the whole span of our kind so far, that there is no meaningful sense in which we will be there for it. And there is a strange, deep peace in that, in knowing the world has enormous chapters ahead of it that have nothing to do with us, chapters that will unfold in their own quiet time, whether or not anyone remains to witness them. The planet does not need an audience. It never has. It will close the Mediterranean and lift old sea floors into new mountains in the same patient silence in which it has done everything else. And somehow, in that vast indifference, it is deeply calming to lie beneath. The map is already dissolving toward its next shape, one ocean opening while another closes, the continents reaching slowly toward a reunion no one will ever see. Between the wide drift of the continents and the slow wearing of the mountains, there is one edge of the world where the erasing happens just fast enough for a single person to almost watch it. So let us leave the deep time of the continents for a while and go down to the water's edge, to the one place the slow planet lets us see it work. Almost everything we have talked about tonight moves too slowly to see. The mountains wear down across 100 lifetimes. The continents drift at the speed of a growing fingernail. But there is one edge of the world where the erasing runs quick enough that a single person, over the ordinary years of a life, can watch it happen. And that edge is the shore. Stand where the land meets the sea, and you are standing on the busiest boundary on the planet, the one place where the remaking of the world runs fast enough to touch. Think of a sea cliff, a wall of rock standing against the open ocean. Every wave that strikes it does a little work, wedging into the cracks, loosening the stone, carrying off the pieces that fall. A single wave changes nothing you could measure, but the waves never stop coming, and over the years the cliff retreats, stepping slowly back from the water, leaving the sea a little wider and the land a little smaller with every season. Where the rock is soft, this happens fast enough to see within a lifetime. Whole rows of houses and roads that once stood safely inland end up at the crumbling edge, and then over it, and then gone. As the sea quietly takes back ground people had always believed was solid and permanent and theirs. There are villages on the softer coasts of the world that have simply fallen into the water over the last century, street by street. The shore is the one place where the planet lets you watch its true nature at something close to human speed, and the beach itself is never the same beach twice. The sand you walk on is always traveling, carried along the coast by waves that come in at a slight angle and drag the grains sideways with each surge. Geologists call this longshore drift, and it means sand is forever being taken from one stretch of shore and delivered to another, so beaches slowly shift and rebuild themselves, season after season, the whole sandy edge of a continent quietly on the move. The beach you remember from years ago is not exactly gone, but it is not the same either. Its sand has moved on down the coast and been replaced by other sand, grain by grain. the way the cells of a body are replaced while the person somehow remains, so that the beach persists as a shape and a name even though almost nothing in it stays still. You have felt the truth of this yourself, if you ever built anything at the water's edge as a child. You build a castle in the sand, close to the sea, proud of its walls and towers, and the tide comes in, and wave by wave the walls soften and slump and dissolve, and by evening the beach is smooth and blank again, as though nothing had ever stood there. That small, familiar heartbreak is the whole story of the coast, told at a scale you can watch in an afternoon. The great sea cliffs are castles too. The whole shoreline is a castle, endlessly built up by the land and endlessly taken back by the sea. And the only reason it ever looks permanent is that it is being rebuilt at very nearly the same rate it is being taken. This is why it helps to think of a shoreline not as a place, but as an event. A coast is not a fixed line someone could draw once and trust to stay put forever. It is a boundary that exists only because it is constantly being remade, a meeting between land and water that has to keep happening for the shore to be there at all. The moment the remaking stopped, the shore as you know it would cease to be a shore. It is a little like a flame, which is not really an object but a process, a shape held steady only by the constant burning of the fuel beneath it. The coastline is held steady the same way, by the constant erasing and rebuilding, the waves taking and the rivers delivering, a standing wave of pure change that looks, from where you have spread your towel, like the most settled and eternal thing in the world. And over the next 100 million years, every shore you can picture will move, not by inches but by hundreds of miles, as the seas rise and fall, and the continents drift, and the oceans open and close. The particular coast you love, the one you can see when you close your eyes, is a temporary meeting of a temporary land and a temporary sea, held for this one brief geological moment in a shape you happen to be born just in time to know. That is not a reason to hold it any less dearly. If anything, it is a reason to hold it closer. No one before you saw quite this shore, and no one after you ever will. And for the whole length of your life, it is yours to walk on. Nothing here was ever meant to be kept. Everything here was meant to be passed through, and loved while it lasts, and let go of gently when the tide comes in. So the shore is where the patient planet finally shows its hand, remaking itself fast enough for a person to feel, the one visible edge of the great slow erasing. And standing there, watching the waves take the land grain by grain, and the sand travel away down the coast, and the cliffs step slowly backward year by year, you might begin to wonder, after all this endless taking, whether anything at all survives the erasing, whether there is anything on this restless planet stubborn enough to last. And there is. A few impossibly durable things have made it through every gathering and scattering, every ocean opened and closed, and they are the closest thing the planet has to a memory that cannot be rubbed out. So let us go and find the things that refuse to be erased. After everything we have said tonight, you would be forgiven for thinking nothing at all could survive from the very beginning, that the planet's endless recycling must have ground every scrap of its earlier self back into anonymous new rock. And that is very nearly true, but not quite, because here and there, locked inside younger stone, there are grains so tough and so stubborn that they have come through everything the planet could do to them, and the oldest of them are older than almost anything else you could ever hold. They are zircons, tiny crystals smaller than a grain of sand, and their gift is that they are very nearly impossible to destroy. A zircon can survive having its parent rock eroded away all around it, So the freed grain washes down a river, settles in the sea, and is pressed into a brand new rock made of the crushed remains of an older world. It can survive that rock being buried and heated and lifted and worn away in its turn, and the grain washing out and settling and being locked into yet another rock, cycle after cycle, while everything around it is remade. The zircon rides through the whole rock cycle like a seed that will not break, passing through world after world unchanged, carrying its cargo of information across billions of years that erased almost everything else. In the dry hills of a place called Jack Hills in Western Australia, geologists have found zircon grains dated to more than 4 billion years old, older than the oldest surviving rock, nearly as old as the planet itself. And the way we can know their age is one of the quiet marvels of science. When a zircon first forms, tiny amounts of uranium become trapped inside its crystal, and uranium is unstable. Over immense spans of time it decays, atom by atom, slowly turning into lead, at a rate we have measured with great precision. So by counting how much uranium is left in a grain and how much lead has quietly accumulated in its place, we can read off, with real accuracy, how long ago that crystal first hardened. It is the same kind of clock that told us the Earth and the Moon are each about 4.5 billion years old. The same clock that, when the first moon rocks were carried home and dated in 1969, revealed our companion to be an ancient, geologically dead world. Inside every zircon there is one of these clocks, running quietly since the grain was born, waiting to be read. And what the oldest of them tell us is a kind of memory. Their age says solid crust existed on Earth astonishingly early, and the faint chemistry sealed inside them hints at something gentler still, at a young planet that may already have had liquid water at its surface, far cooler and wetter than we once imagined, when we pictured the newborn Earth as a sea of fire. We could never have assembled that picture from the rocks themselves, because those rocks are long gone, worn away and melted down ages ago. The stone that first held these grains, the landscapes they formed in, the entire surface of that ancient Earth, all of it has been erased past any hope of recovery. Only the grains remain, ghost text from a page the planet scraped clean 4 billion years ago. This is the counter-motif to everything we have followed tonight. Think of a great library that burned, its shelves and volumes and centuries of writing all gone to ash, and then imagine that in the coal ruins someone finds a single charred word that survived the fire, one word out of many millions. From that one word, its handwriting and its ink, you can begin to reconstruct something real about what the whole library once held. The zircon is that surviving word. The library is the entire early Earth. Almost everything is lost, yes, but almost everything is not the same as everything, and the little that remains is enough to prove the library was real, and to let us read a few faint words of what was written there. Or think of it the way you know it from your own life, though it is a tender thing to name as you drift toward sleep. The house you grew up in may be gone, torn down or changed past recognizing, the street rearranged, the people scattered. And yet some small bright fragment of a single moment from that place survives inside you, clearer and more durable than the building that held it, a grain of memory outlasting the entire world it came from. The smallest things are so often the ones that last. The mountain does not survive. The ocean does not survive. The continent itself is remade, but a crystal smaller than a grain of sand rides through all of it untouched, and in the end it is the tiny stubborn thing that carries the oldest truth. So the erasing planet is not perfectly thorough after all, and that small imperfection turns out to be a mercy. If the recycling were truly complete, we would have no way of knowing anything about the deep past, no clock, no chemistry, no ghost text, only the blank current draft, and not the faintest evidence there had ever been another. Instead, the planet keeps a scattering of these unerasable grains, salted through its younger rocks, and they are enough to prove there were earlier worlds beneath this one, and to let us read a few surviving words of what they said. The planet forgets almost everything, but it cannot quite forget everything, and in that cannot quite lies very nearly the whole of what we know about where we came from. Which brings us, gently, to one last look backward before we turn toward the future. We have found the grains that survived the erasing here on the surface, the ghost text written in stone. But there is another kind of memory the planet keeps, far below the reach of any eraser, in a place where nothing on the surface can ever touch it, and it is the deepest and quietest record of all. So let us go down, one last time, into the dark, warm interior of the world. We have spent the whole night watching the surface of the world forget itself, but the planet is far deeper than its surface, and something surprising happens to the memory of the world once it sinks below the reach of wind and water. When a slab of old ocean floor bends down at a trench and begins its long descent, it does not simply melt and mix away as quickly as you might imagine. It sinks slowly, holding its shape for a very long time. A cold sheet of former sea floor gliding down through the hot rock around it. And by listening to the way earthquakes send their waves ringing through the whole body of the earth, scientists have learned to trace these sunken slabs far down inside the planet, cold ghosts of vanished oceans still recognizable, hanging in the deep long after the surface that made them was erased. The surface forgot them. The depths kept them. And the deeper you go, the longer the memory seems to last. Down near the very bottom of the mantle, close to the boundary with the planet's core, there are vast ancient structures, enormous regions of rock that appear to have sat there, largely undisturbed, for a very long stretch of the planet's history, so deep and so old that the slow churning of the interior has never quite swept them away. There is still real mystery about exactly what they are and how they came to be. An honest scientist will tell you plainly that we do not yet fully understand them. But whatever they are among the oldest and most stable arrangements of material anywhere inside the Earth, kept safe by sheer depth, because nothing on the restless surface can reach down far enough to erase them. The two erasers we followed all night, the wind and water from above and the sinking crust from below, both do their work on the surface and just beneath it. Neither reaches the deep interior. Down there, in the dark and the pressure, the planet remembers. So the erasing has a flaw. It is fierce and nearly total up on the surface, where hardly anything survives, and it fades to nothing in the depths, where things can rest for billions of years untouched. The planet is a little like a deep, still lake. On the surface of a lake, the water is always moving, the wind stirring it into ripples, the light breaking across it, nothing holding its shape for more than a moment. But sink down, away from the wind and the light, and the water grows calmer and calmer, until at the very bottom it lies perfectly still, and there the sediment settles and stays, quiet layer upon quiet layer, an undisturbed record of everything that ever drifted down. The planet keeps its deepest memories that way, far below the restless surface, in a stillness the erasing never touches. There is a kind of memory in your own life that works the same way, quieter and harder to name than the rest. The surface of the mind is restless, always moving, and the small details of ordinary days are erased almost as fast as they happen, the way the surface of a lake forgets each passing ripple. But there is a deeper kind of memory, older and slower and often wordless, kept somewhere far below the reach of that everyday forgetting, rising up sometimes without warning at the scent of something, or a few bars of an old song, proof that not everything the surface lost is truly gone. The planet has that too. Beneath its forgetful, ever-changing surface, there is a keeping place, and the record held there is the longest and safest of all. There is a real comfort in this, and it is the gentle inversion the whole night has been building toward. We began by watching the planet wipe its face clean of every scar, and it would have been easy to feel that nothing lasts, and the erasing simply wins in the end. But the erasing does not win everywhere. On the surface it is nearly total, and yet even there it leaves the stubborn grains behind, the ghost text under the writing. And below the surface it does not reach at all, and the deep planet holds the oldest memories of the world in perfect stillness, kept safe forever by the simple fact of lying too deep to be disturbed. The world forgets its surface and remembers its depths, and both are true at once, and held together they are far kinder than either would be alone. It is worth resting on that a moment, because it changes the shape of the whole story. A planet that only forgot would be a sad thing, a world endlessly wiping itself blank, with nothing kept. And a planet that only remembered would be the moon, frozen with all its old wounds on display, unable to change, unable to heal, a dead world holding perfectly still. Earth is neither. It is the living balance between them, forgetting on the surface so it can keep changing and stay alive, and remembering in the deep so that nothing it has ever been is entirely, absolutely lost. It forgets enough to stay young and keeps enough to stay itself. And that double gift is a large part of what has made it the one world we know, where anything could ever wake up and wonder about any of this at all. So as we turn now, at last, toward the future, toward the next 100 million years, and the world the erasing planet is going to build, carry this with you. The surface will keep changing. The mountains and the coastlines and the whole familiar map will all be rewritten. But the deep planet will hold its long memory steady through all of it, unhurried and undisturbed, remembering the vanished oceans of the deep past, while the surface busily forgets the present. And now, with that quiet reassurance resting beneath us like the still floor of a deep lake, let us walk forward gently into the world that is coming. Let us walk forward now, slowly, with no particular hurry to arrive, into the world the planet is going to make after this one. We do not have to mark off the years or keep count of the millions. We only have to let the continents move at their own unhurried pace and watch from very high up as the map you know softens and reshapes itself into something no one has ever seen. In the early part of this walk, the changes are small enough that you might not notice them. Coastlines shift by the width of a room over a lifetime. The great oceans widen or narrow by amounts you would need an instrument to catch. But keep walking forward. Let the tens of millions of years accumulate beneath your feet, and the small motions gather into large ones. The Mediterranean closes and is gone, and where that warm sea used to be, a young mountain range rises along the seam where Africa has finally pressed home into Europe. Its slopes built in part from the old drowned floor of the vanished sea. Other seas narrow and disappear the same way, and the continents they once held apart drift into contact one by one, each meeting raising its own new highlands. So the future world is stitched together along a series of fresh mountain ranges, each born from the closing of an ocean we know now. The different models of this future do not entirely agree on how the pieces will finally come together, because the motion is so slow and the far future genuinely uncertain. And this is one of those places where honesty is far kinder than false confidence. They give the resulting supercontinent different names for the different paths it might take. In some versions, it is Pangaea Proxima, the next Pangaea, the continents folding back roughly the way they came. In others, it is Amasia, gathered up around the north, or it goes by names like Orica or Novo Pangaea. But underneath the disagreement, every model tells the same story we have been following all night. The continents come back together, the long scattering reverses into a gathering, and somewhere between 1 and 300 million years from now, most of the land on Earth is once again joined into a single vast continent, surrounded by a single vast ocean, a new supercontinent for a world that will have forgotten the last one as completely as the last one forgot the ones before it. Picture it the way you might picture the end of a long, good evening among friends. Early on, everyone is spread through the house, in the corners, out on the porch, scattered across the rooms. And then, without anyone quite deciding it, the gathering draws inward, people drifting from the edges toward the one warm room, until at last everyone is together in one place. The continents do exactly this. They drift in from the far corners of the globe, without any decision or design, and collect over a span that makes the entire history of humanity look like a single held breath, into one great land where all the world's soil is joined. And the interior of that future supercontinent would be a strange and enormous place. So far from any coast that the moisture of the sea could barely reach it, the heart of that land would be a vast dry wilderness, hundreds of miles from the nearest shore in every direction, with more violent extremes of heat and cold than anything the scattered world of today produces. The coasts might be gentle and green, but the center would be a great arid emptiness on a scale the present Earth does not have. It is a world you can almost stand inside, and yet a world with no human meaning left in it. None of the cities we built, none of the borders we drew, none of the names we gave to things, all of it erased and folded back into the rock long before that new land ever finished gathering. And here is the open question I will leave gently with you as we walk. Not a frightening one, only a large and quiet one to hold. When that supercontinent has formed, and the world is once again a single land, beneath a single sky, what will remain of everything that is here right now? The mountains we know will be gone, worn down and recycled. The coastlines will be gone. The oceans will be rearranged past recognizing. And somewhere in the rock of that future world, pressed thin between the layers, there may be the faintest trace of a strange brief moment when the planet was covered in a species that built and dug and lit up the night. A single ghostly line in the stone that some future eye, if there is one at all, might just be able to read. What that trace would look like, and whether anything would ever find it, is the last quiet place we will visit before the night closes. For now it is enough to walk, and to watch the map dissolve, and to feel how gentle the dissolving is. There is no catastrophe in any of this, no single terrible day when the world you know comes to an end. There is only the slow, patient reaching of the continents toward one another, the same drift that carried them apart now carrying them home, so unhurried that at any single moment nothing appears to be happening. The world does not fall. It simply, slowly, becomes the next world, the way this one became itself out of the pieces of the last. And you can rest inside that slowness, knowing the great gathering is already underway beneath you tonight, in no hurry to reach an ending further away than the mind can comfortably hold. So the continents are walking home, gathering slowly into one great land no eye will ever see whole, and the world we know is dissolving softly into that future. But if the planet erases so thoroughly, then it is worth asking tenderly and without alarm what it would even take for anything of us to survive the erasing, and what a geologist 100 million years from now might actually find of the world we are living in tonight. Imagine a geologist standing on that future supercontinent, 100 million years from now, in a world where every trace of the map we know has been recycled away. This future observer, whoever or whatever they turn out to be, is doing exactly what geologists have always done, reading the layers of rock like the pages of a book, each layer a thin slice of time pressed into stone. They read downward through the ages, layer by patient layer, and then they come to a single line, very thin, thinner than a finger held sideways, and something about it is unusual enough to make them stop, because our whole time here, all of recorded history and everything before it, all our building and burning and digging and making would be compressed in that rock record into a layer so thin you could nearly cover it with your hand. 100 million years takes the tallest city we ever raised and grinds it to sand, folds it into sediment, and presses it into stone. And what is left of everything we made is not towers and not monuments, but a faint band, a subtle change in the rock's chemistry, a scattering of unusual materials that do not appear in the layers above or below, traces of the metals we pulled from the ground and spread across the world, strange particles from the way we burned things for a few short centuries, perhaps the chemical shadow of materials we invented that the planet had never made on its own, a thin, bright line, and almost nothing more. I want to offer that not as a sadness, but as something almost tender, because the way you hold it is a choice, and the gentler way is also the truer one. Think of a heavy old book with a single flower pressed inside it, flat and faded and thin as paper. The flower is not diminished by being thin. It is kept. Someone loved it enough once to press it there, and the weight of all those pages has held it safe for years. And when the book falls open to that page, there it is, the ghost of a summer, still unmistakably itself. Our thin line in the rock is that pressed flower. The planet is the heavy book. And the 100 million years of layers above and below our own are the quiet weight that keeps our page safe, holding the faint mark of everything we were between the leaves of the world. Or think of a single bookmark left in a very long novel, a slim ribbon marking one place in a story of many hundreds of pages. Our whole time here is that width of ribbon, one thin marker in a book with billions of years of pages. And there is no shame in being thin in a book that long. It is a marvel simply to be in the book at all. The moon has no such book. It has kept every scar for 4 billion years, but it has no story written in it, no chapters, no living pages, only the same frozen record repeating. Mars has a book, and even a few early pages that hint at ancient water, but almost nothing written in the great middle of it, no cities, no forests, no ribbon marking the place where anything ever lived and looked up and wondered. Earth alone, of all the worlds we can reach, will carry a page that says something was here that looked up at the sky and asked these very questions, and that page will be thin precisely because the planet is so generous with time and so sparing with permanence. The very trade that made the page worth writing and whether anyone ever reads it does not, in the end, change what it is. The pressed flower is still a kept flower, even if the book is never opened again. The thin, bright line will still be a true record of everything we were, even if no future eye ever finds it, even if the erasing planet one day takes that line too and melts it back into the source, the way it has taken every other page before ours. There is no promise that our line will last forever, because nothing on this planet lasts forever. What there is instead is something quieter and better than forever. There is the simple fact of having been written at all, one clear line in the long book of a planet that mostly keeps nothing. So you can rest easy with the thinness of that line. It is not a measure of how little we mattered. It is a measure of how patient the planet is, how freely it spends the long ages, how much room there is inside 4.5 billion years for a whole species to appear and build and wonder, and lay down its thin, bright mark and then be gently pressed into the record like a flower closed into a book. Held the right way, it is one of the kindest things the erasing planet does, that on a world which keeps almost nothing, it keeps a page for us. And there is something freeing in it too. We spend so much of our short waking lives worried about being remembered, about leaving something behind that will last. And the planet answers that worry with a strange and gentle mercy. It says you do not have to carry the weight of lasting forever. Nothing here does. You only have to be here fully and briefly, one bright line in an unimaginably long book. And the being here is enough, and always was. And you can set the worry down now, like a stone you no longer need to hold. And now the night grows quieter still, and we can let go of the rock and the continents for a while, and lift our eyes upward, because the erasing planet is not alone in its slow changes. The sky above it is drifting too, gently, on timescales even longer and softer than the ones we have followed. And there is no better place to let the mind slow all the way down than up there, in the slow turning of the moon and the sun and the far patient lights. So let us leave the ground behind for a little while and look up. The moon is leaving, not tonight, and not in any way you could ever feel, but truly a little farther away with every year. With every orbit, it drifts very slightly outward, retreating at a rate we have measured with astonishing precision, about 3.8 centimeters a year, once again very close to the pace your fingernails grow. Over a single human life, the moon slips only a couple of feet farther off, far too little to change the familiar face it turns toward you. But over hundreds of millions of years, it becomes a real and growing distance, and the moon of the deep future will hang a little smaller in the sky than the one above your roof tonight. We know this so exactly because of one of the quietest experiments ever left running. When the Apollo 11 astronauts walked on the moon, they set out a small array of mirrors facing back toward Earth, and ever since, scientists have bounced beams of laser light off them and timed the return, measuring the distance down to a matter of centimeters. Year after year the number grows, and it confirms a prediction made more than a century ago by George Darwin, a son of the naturalist Charles Darwin, who spent his life on the slow mathematics of the Earth and Moon. He calculated that the Moon must be spiraling gradually outward, and that the pull of the tides was the reason. And the mirrors he never lived to see have proven him right. Because as the moon drifts outward, it is also doing something quiet to the length of your days. The tides it raises in the oceans drag against the turning of the earth, the gentlest possible break on the planet's spin, so that each day is very slightly longer than the one before. The rubbing of all that water lengthens our day by only about 0.002 of a second every century, A change so small it sounds like nothing, and yet across millions and billions of years it steadily adds up. In the deep past, when the moon rode closer and the tides pulled harder, the days were noticeably shorter, and a creature living then would have watched the sun cross a sky that turned faster than the one you know. And far in the future, the days will be longer than tonight, the sun crossing more slowly, the planet turning at its own gently easing pace. There is no drama in any of this, and that is exactly why it belongs here, in the quiet part of the night. The moon does not tear itself away from us. It loosens, the way a child on a swing loses height when no one is left to push, each slow arc a little lower than the one before. Or think of the way, at the very end of a slow dance, a hand is not pulled away, but simply, gradually, let go. The fingers loosening so softly, you could never name the instant the holding became a letting go. The moon and the earth are held in that same long, slow loosening, a grip that has lasted billions of years and will last billions more, easing apart at the speed of a growing fingernail, neither hurrying, neither grieving, just slowly giving each other a little more room. And this is the same story we have been telling all night, only lifted off the ground and set gently into the sky. Nothing holds still. The continents, the oceans, the mountains, and now the moon itself, and even the length of the day. All of it changing, all of it so slowly that from inside a single human life it passes easily for permanence. You were handed a moon at a particular distance and a day of a particular length, and you have assumed all your life they were fixed features of the world, the way you once assumed the continents were fixed. And they are not. They are one frame of a film, held just long enough for you to mistake it for a photograph. Let that be a comfort rather than any kind of vertigo, because the comfort is the truer reading. You live inside a moment of astonishing stillness, a stretch of time so short against the planet's clock that almost nothing changes while you are here, and that stillness is a genuine gift the slowness gives you. The moon will not noticeably move in your lifetime. The day will not lengthen by anything you could measure. For the whole span of your life the world will hold beautifully still, and all the vast, slow changing we have followed tonight will stay just beyond the edge of anything you could feel, leaving you a solid, quiet, unmoving world to rest in. And here is one soft, open question to carry towards sleep. Nothing you need to answer, only something gentle to hold. If the moon is slowly leaving, and the days are slowly lengthening, and the continents are slowly gathering, then everything you think of as simply the way the world is really only the way it happens to be tonight. In the deep past, there was a shorter day, and a nearer moon, and an unrecognizable map, and in the deep future there will be a longer day and a more distant moon, and a single great land, and by then the moon will have drawn so far off that it can no longer quite cover the sun, and the total eclipses we treasure will simply stop happening. The only reason any of it feels fixed is that you happen to arrive during one quiet frame of an endlessly moving picture. There is nothing you need to do with that thought, only let it hold you, the way the slow world holds you, while it changes far too slowly to disturb your rest. So the moon lets go by the width of a fingernail each year, and the days grow longer too slowly ever to feel, and the whole sky drifts on timescales even softer than the rock beneath you. But before we drift all the way out past the moon, to the very farthest and slowest changes of all, let us come back down for a moment, closer than we have been all night, all the way down to the smallest thing there is, and simply hold it for a while. Imagine a single pebble resting in the palm of your hand. It is smooth and cool, and small enough to close your fingers gently around, and a little heavier than you expect a small thing to be. You have held 100 stones like it, and never once thought twice, on a beach, along a path, at the edge of a stream, picked one up and turned it over and set it down without ever wondering where it had been. Tonight, let us wonder, slowly, and with all the time in the world, because this one small stone holds the entire story of the erasing planet inside it, and you can feel every part of that story in the quiet weight of it against your skin. This pebble was once part of something much larger. Long ago it was locked deep inside solid rock, buried in the body of some hill or mountain, held in the dark and the pressure for a length of time that has no meaning to a human life. It did not move. It did not change. It simply waited, part of the mountain, while the world far above went through age after age it would never see. And then, slowly, the erasing found it. The rock around it was worn away, grain by patient grain, by the rain and the frost and the wind, until at last the small piece that would become your pebble was loosened and handed out of the mountain into the moving world. And then it began to travel. It tumbled into a stream that carried it a little way and set it down, and picked it up in the next high water and carried it farther, and with every tumble the water rounded it, wearing away the sharp corners, polishing it against 1,000 other stones doing the same. This is why it is smooth in your hand tonight. Every rounded curve is a record of that long journey, a place where the water took away what was sharp and left only what was soft. You are not holding a broken piece of a mountain. You are holding what the erasing made of a piece of a mountain, the gentle shape left behind after all the hardness was given up to the stream. Feel the weight of it again, and let the weight simply be time. Everything that ever happened to this stone happened slowly. There was no moment of shattering, no sudden fall, only the long, unhurried loosening and rounding, spread across a stretch of years so enormous that the stone passed through it the way you might pass through a single quiet afternoon, without alarm, without haste. The pebble is not tired from its journey. Stone does not grow tired. It rests in your palm perfectly at ease, holding in its small, heavy shape the whole calm history of its own slow unmaking. And its journey is not even finished. That is perhaps the gentlest part to hold, as you lie here. If you set this pebble back into the stream, the water would carry it onward, still rounding it, still wearing it down, until across ages far beyond your life it became a grain of sand, and the sand washed down to the sea and settled on the floor, and was pressed into new stone and sank into the warm body of the planet, and melted and rose again, one impossibly distant day, as part of a mountain that does not yet exist, in a world no eye will ever see. The stone in your hand is not at the end of anything. It is in the middle, exactly as everything on this planet is always in the middle, passing through one shape on its slow way toward the next, and the smoothness you are feeling is only this one moment of its passage, this brief resting place between the mountain it used to be and the mountain it will one day become. You are in the middle too. That is not a heavy thought tonight, only a quiet, companionable one. You are a passing shape in the long story of the world, held for a little while in this form, in this bed, on this one night, exactly as the pebble is held for a little while as a smooth, cool stone. And there is nothing to fear in being a passing shape, because look how gently the pebble wears its own. It does not grip its shape. It does not fight the water or refuse the journey. It lets itself be carried and rounded and remade. And in that letting, there is a deep and complete peace, the peace of belonging to something so much larger and slower than yourself, that the only thing you are ever asked to do is rest inside it. So hold the pebble a moment longer and let your attention rest on it, on the coolness slowly warming against your skin, the rounded weight settling into the hollow of your hand. There is no thought you need to think, only the weight and the warmth and the smoothness, the way the stone itself only ever does one thing at a time, slowly, and without any hurry at all. And now, very gently, let it go. Set the pebble down in your mind, the way the stream itself will one day set it down, the way the patient planet sets down everything it has ever carried, softly, without holding on. You do not have to carry it any further. Nothing on this patient planet needs you to. The stones round themselves without you. The mountains wear themselves down without you. The rivers find their way to the sea without any help at all. So let your hand fall open and let the small, cool weight of the whole turning world settle back into the stream of things, where it has always belonged and where it will always be carried, with or without you. The pebble rests, the mountain wears, the river moves, the planet turns, and you, a small, warm, passing shape held, for a little while in the middle of a very long story, can finally rest too, held in the slow world exactly the way the stone was held in your hand, asking nothing, keeping nothing, simply here, and warm, and breathing, for the quiet length of one more night. And beyond the pebble, and the stream, and the ground beneath you, farther out than any of it, and slower still, the sun and the far distant galaxies are drifting through changes of their own, so vast and unhurried that they make even the wearing of the mountains look quick. So let us drift out now, lightly, one last time, past the moon and out among the stars, and touch the largest and slowest of all the slow things, before the night finally closes over us. Lift your eyes past the moon now, out past the planets, all the way to the sun itself, and even that steady, dependable light is not truly steady. None of this belongs to the next 100 million years, and none of it is anything to hold with worry tonight. It is simply the slowest change of all, the one the entire sky is quietly riding, so gentle that across the whole span of everything we have talked about this evening, it barely stirs. The one the entire sky is quietly riding, so gentle that across the whole span of everything we have talked about this evening, it barely stirs. And the stars themselves are drifting. The night sky, you know, the patterns you might pick out through a window, are not fixed either. Every star is moving, each on its own slow path through the galaxy, and over long enough spans, the familiar shapes will loosen and rearrange, the old patterns dissolving, and new ones we have never seen slowly taking their place. The sky is a slower palimpsest than the ground, but a palimpsest all the same, erasing and rewriting its patterns across millions of years, holding each shape only long enough for one brief generation to learn it by heart before it drifts imperceptibly apart. And farther out than the stars, at the very largest scale we will reach tonight, our whole galaxy is drifting slowly toward another. The great spiral of Andromeda, our nearest large neighbor, a huge pinwheel of stars very much like our own Milky Way, is moving toward us across an ocean of distance so vast that the approach will take billions of years to complete. And when the two galaxies do meet, they will not crash so much as slowly pass through and around one another. Their stars spread so incredibly far apart that almost none of them will ever come close to touching. The two great pinwheels gradually mingling over an unimaginable stretch of time into a single larger galaxy. It is the biggest slow motion we know of that involves us at all. and it is so slow and so gentle that even calling it a collision gives entirely the wrong feeling. Picture instead two clouds on a still summer afternoon, drifting toward each other across a wide and quiet sky. They move so slowly that you could watch them for a full hour and not be certain they had moved at all. And yet, over the long, patient afternoon, they draw together and touch and merge into one larger cloud without a sound, without a shock, without any single moment you could point to and say, "There, that is when it happened." That is how the galaxies come together. That is how the sun brightens, and how the stars slide into their new patterns, and how the moon lets go, and how the continents gather, and how the mountains wear away, and how the sea floor sinks quietly back into the planet. All of it, from the pebble resting in the stream to the merging of two galaxies, is the same kind of motion, slow past all feeling, gentle past all fear, so patient that from where you lie, the entire restless universe passes easily for a still and quiet place. And that stillness, the beautiful, generous, not quite true stillness the slowness gives you, is exactly where we will rest. You do not have to hold any of these scales in your mind at once. You do not have to keep the time scale straight, or remember the names, or follow the mechanisms any longer. It is enough now to let the whole moving universe blur softly into the one thing it has always felt like from here, a calm and steady world beneath a calm and steady sky, holding perfectly still around you while you sleep, even though nothing in it is truly still, even though every part of it is drifting gently toward whatever it will slowly become. Let the galaxies drift. Let the stars slide into their new arrangements. Let the sun keep its long, slow brightening, and the moon its long, slow leaving, and the continents their long, slow gathering. All of it far away, and all of it far in the future, and all of it utterly, reliably gentle. There is nothing out there rushing toward you tonight. There is only the long, slow sky, keeping its vast and patient time, asking nothing of you except that you rest, for a little while, inside one still and quiet frame of it. Now we come home, back down from the drifting galaxies and the leaving moon and the sliding stars, back through the dark to the quiet ground beneath you, to the erasing planet that started all of this still turning, still gently forgetting, still remaking the whole world one patient grain at a time while you drift towards sleep. We have followed it a very long way tonight, out to the edge of the galaxies and back, and there is only a little further to go now, only the gentlest part left, in which we ask nothing more of you than to let go, one soft thing at a time, of everything we have carried this far. Let us not learn anything new now. There is nothing left to understand tonight, and you do not need to follow anything anymore. Let us only go back, slowly, and touch each of the gentle things we found this evening, one at a time, the way you might let your eyes drift across a familiar room in the dark, naming the soft shapes you already know and asking nothing of any of them. There is the rain. Somewhere out there tonight, it is falling on high ground, carrying a little of that ground away with it, the way it always has and always will, one grain loosened and set gently moving toward the distant sea. It is in no hurry. It has all the time there is. You do not have to picture where the grain is going. You only have to know that it is moving, softly, in the dark, while you rest. There is the river. It is carrying the mountains down to the sea tonight, exactly as it did last night, and will tomorrow. The whole slow weight of the high country dissolved and suspended in the moving water. It does not strain, and it does not hurry. It simply flows, and the continent grows a little lower behind it, too slowly for anyone to feel, and there is nothing to do about it except let the quiet sound of moving water carry you further towards sleep. There is the ice in the cold, high places, pressing down under its own great weight, flowing where nothing solid should flow, carving its wide, quiet valleys a hair's breadth at a time. It finished shaping the valleys you know long before you were born, and it is shaping new ones now, somewhere far away, and it will still be shaping them long after tonight is forgotten. Let it carve. It asks nothing of you. There is the sea floor, spreading slowly outward from its hidden seam in the middle of the ocean, new stone rising and cooling and drifting gently away in the both directions, toward the distant trenches. And there is the trench itself, deep and dark and quiet, drawing the old floor down into the warm interior of the world, unmaking it softly, returning it to the source. None of this is violent. All of it is slow. You can let each of these settle back into the dark the moment you have touched it. There is the mountain, wearing down from its summit and rising from its root at once, trading its height for time, softening from a sharp young peak toward a low, gentle hill across a span so long that 100 lifetimes could not watch it happen. And there is the whole rock cycle turning quietly beneath everything. The molten stone rising and cooling, the cooled stone weathering to sand, the sand settling and pressing back into stone, the stone sinking and melting and rising once more, the great slow wheel that has turned since long before there was anything alive to watch it, turning again tonight, using and reusing the same patient atoms to write draft after draft of the world. There are the continents drifting home. They are reaching toward one another across the whole face of the globe, so slowly that at any single moment nothing seems to move, gathering by the width of a fingernail each year toward the single great land they will one distant day become. There is the ocean widening quietly on one side of the world, and the sea closing quietly on the other, the map already dissolving, softly, into its next shape. You do not have to hold that new map in your mind. It will assemble itself across 100 million years whether or not anyone is watching, and there is a deep rest in that, in belonging to something so large and so unhurried that your only part in it tonight is to sleep. And there, holding all of it, are the few things the erasing cannot quite reach, the stubborn grains riding through every cycle unchanged, carrying the memory of vanished worlds, the deep planet, remembering in its perfect stillness the oceans the surface long ago forgot, the thin bright line that will one day hold the faint kept memory of us, pressed like a flower into the heavy book of time. Nothing here is ever only lost. Everything here is used again. The world forgets its restless surface and keeps its quiet depths, and both are true at once, and both are gentle. And above all of it, there is the sky, drifting on its own even slower currents, the moon letting go by a fingernail each year, the day lengthening too slowly to feel, the stars sliding into new patterns, the far galaxies drawing together as unhurriedly as clouds on a still afternoon. All of it moving, all of it calm, all of it so slow that from right here, tonight, in this bed, the whole restless universe holds perfectly, beautifully still around you. And notice, as we set each of these down, how not one of them ever asked to be noticed. The rain did not fall tonight, so that you would think about it. The river does not carry the mountain to the sea for any audience. The continents have been drifting home far longer than there have been eyes to watch them, and not one of these patient things has ever needed a witness to do its slow and faithful work. That, perhaps, is the deepest comfort the erasing planet offers, the simple comfort of not being needed by something enormous. Through every moment of tonight, there was never once a time when the world required you to hold it up. It holds itself. It has always held itself. The world is not performing for you, and that means you are free now to stop watching, to set down the whole heavy habit of keeping watch and trust the slow world to keep turning on its own. You can close your eyes on all of it, and none of it will falter. So let the rain fall without you. Let the rivers find the sea without you. Let the continents drift home and the deep planet remember, and the long sky wheel overhead. All of it without you for a while. There is nothing left to keep track of now, nothing to remember and nothing to understand. There is only the slow world turning, keeping its vast patient time without any need for you at all. You can let go of every one of these things now, the way the planet lets go of its mountains, gently, without grief. Let them go, and let yourself go with them, down and down into the quiet, while everything keeps turning, softly, in the dark. We began the night with a strange fact, that Earth should be as scarred as the moon, and is, instead, almost perfectly smooth. And we can end it now, knowing exactly where all those missing scars went. They were worn from the tops of the mountains by the rain, carried down to the sea by the rivers, spread across the floor of the oceans, and drawn down at the last into the deep, dark trenches where the surface of the world is quietly swallowed and melted and made ready to rise again. The planet did not lose its history by accident. It erased it on purpose, patiently, the same way it erases everything, because the erasing is the very thing that keeps it alive. Every scar the moon still wears is a wound that could never heal. Every scar the Earth has lost is a wound that healed so completely there is nothing left to see, and that healing has never stopped in 4.5 billion years. And by now, the word erasing should have lost whatever sharpness it carried when we began. This is not a planet destroying itself. It is a planet forever renewing itself, a stone tablet endlessly sanding its own surface smooth and writing a fresh draft over the old one, a library that stays alive by pulping its oldest books and printing new ones on the recovered paper. The mountains you love are a draft. The coastline you know by heart is a draft. The whole map you carry in your head is one frame of a film that has been running for 4.5 billion years, and it is already far too slowly for you to feel, dissolving into the next frame, the closing seas and the gathering continents, and the single great land that no eye will ever see whole. And through all of that erasing, the planet cannot quite forget everything. A handful of stubborn grains ride through every cycle unchanged, carrying the memory of worlds long gone, ghost text beneath the writing. And someday, pressed thin between the layers of a future world, there may be one more of those faint-kept lines, a single bright band in the rock that holds the memory of us, of a brief moment when the erasing planet was covered in the species that looked up at the leaving moon and the drifting stars and wondered, gently, where everything goes. That line will be thin, but it will be there, a pressed flower in the deep, quiet weight of time. And being there at all, on a planet that keeps almost nothing, is a tenderness the universe rarely offers. So when you wake tomorrow and the ground is solid, and the mountains are exactly where you left them, and the moon hangs at its familiar distance, you will know the truth resting quietly beneath the stillness. None of it is fixed. All of it is moving, gathering, wearing down, drifting apart, at the speed of a growing fingernail, so slowly that your whole life fits easily inside one still and quiet frame. And that stillness is the gift the slowness gives you, a solid world to stand on, a steady sky to sleep beneath, held perfectly still around you for the short bright, while that you are here. You do not have to do anything with that knowledge. You only have to let it be a comfort, which is what it has been all along, underneath the strangeness, waiting for you to see it. If you would like more of these slow journeys, the quiet true ones that ask nothing of you and leave you somewhere calm, you can follow along whenever you like, and the next one will find you on some other night when you need a gentle place to rest your mind. That is the only thing I will ask of you tonight, and even that can wait until the morning. For now there is nothing to do, and nowhere to be. The rivers are carrying the mountains to the sea. The sea floor is sinking slowly back into the planet. The continents are drifting quietly home. The moon is letting go by the width of a fingernail, and not one bit of it needs you awake to continue. So let your breathing slow, and let the room go dark, and let the whole patient turning world keep its vast, slow time without you for a while. Sleep well. The planet will keep forgetting and rebuilding and forgetting again, exactly as it always has, and it will still be here in the morning, one draft newer, holding beautifully, deceptively still, waiting quietly for you to wake.